Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We have good, although there's a twinge of crazy in that first one. Definitely bad for the second, and all sorts of crazy for the third, because the left just can't let the firing of, it's not even the firing of Stephen Colbert, the cancellation of The Late Show go. They have to come up with a deep, dark, sinister conspiracy about what's really happening there, but it's kind of fun just to see how unhinged they've become. So, Jim, let's dive in and do one of your issues that you find as one of your favorite things to report on every couple of years, as the mainstream media tries to pretend, or tries to convince itself maybe even, that this is the cycle. This is the cycle where Texas is going to go blue. They did it with Beto. They tried so hard to get Beto across the finish line. Did not happen. Tried to get Colin Allred across the finish line. Didn't even come close. And so now, with this fight on the Republican side and the Senate race coming up, and the possibility of Ken Paxton becoming the nominee, the Democrats see an opportunity, and they think if they don't have the guy, well, maybe this guy is at least going to be the one to kind of set the vision for the Democrats to potentially win this seat and eventually turn the state blue even in presidential years. But we know how quixotic that adventure has become. Wendy Davis was going to do that about a decade or so ago, and she couldn't even clear 40%. So
game on. Game on, as the Texas Monthly cover back in August 2013. Yes, I keep these things in my mind. And if somebody wants to say, Jim, how is this possibly the biggest news to you guys to talk about on a Monday morning? Maybe it isn't, but this is the news that jumps on my nerve. This is the one that drives me craziest. Because, as you know, people who've followed my coverage over the years have noticed that, you know, every year that there's a Senate race in either Texas or Florida, there's a really, really good chance that the Republican is going to win. That's what it's not guaranteed, but in Texas, the Democrats have not won a statewide race since 1994. And most years they don't come close. I want to say that was August 2013, where they said, it's going to be real competitive this year. And I believe not a single Democrat running statewide cracked, I'm going to say 45%. I know it was like a whole bunch of them were like around 40%. So you're losing like 60-40. It's not close. Texas is a heavily Republican state. Now, will this trend end someday? Sure. Where you and I are, Virginia, up until kind of surprised last year, it was considered a heavily Democratic state, or since the Obama era. Before that, it was seen as very Republican. Before that, it was seen as very Democrat. Ohio used to be seen as the ultimate swing state, and now it's pretty darn reliably red up and down the ticket. States do change, but give me a choice between, will Democrats win a statewide race in Texas, or will Elon have colonies on Mars before then? I think it's kind of neck and neck. Either one, it looks like it's going to be pretty darn far off in the future. So why am I ranting about this? Well, Politico has decided that they have to, that they have to write about State Representative James Talarico, and that he might turn Texas blue, in large part because he recently was a guest for the full 3 hours of Joe Rogan's podcast. Now, look, that's not nothing. That's kind of impressive for a Texas state representative. Apparently, he speaks very openly about his faith. He's a seminary student, which is kind of, this stuff stands out a bit as a Texas Democrat. But it's just hard to believe. Oh, this is it. When, it was just a couple months ago, Democrats were trying to tell us Colin Allred is on the verge of doing this. And he lost by 8.5 percentage points, or about 960,000 votes, to Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, as people, listeners probably remember, was running against Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke came closest than anybody. He came within 3 percentage points, but still didn't do it. And every cycle we get some version of this. And we get a similar version to whichever Democrat is running statewide in Florida. And so I put this in the corner post earlier. What does a Texas Democrat have to do to get national coverage saying this could be the one who turns that turns the state blue? And apparently all you have to do is show up. Yep. Show up, and that's all it takes, and you'll get this kind of credulous coverage. And I ask you, do listeners ever remember any Republican saying this could be the Republican who turns New York State red? Did Lee Zeldin ever get that kind of coverage?
No.
Maybe from a conservative publication.
Sure. Yeah, he would have been a great governor.
Is Steve Garvey the Republican who's going to turn California red? Generally, when it comes to Republican chances in blue states, the mainstream media, they are sharp-eyed, calculating. They're really going to measure it before they give anybody, this guy's got a shot. But when you're a Democrat in one of the, or Stacey Abrams down in Georgia, right? Like, all magazine coverage. This is it. This is the one. It's going to happen. And it just is, it just drives me bonkers. I'm unhealthily obsessed about this. I would love to know why. And in the case of Beto and Abrams, there was definitely this thing like, they knew how to make a New York magazine editor swoon. And that's not what the kinds of people in places like Florida and Georgia and Texas are made of. And if you want to win those states, you probably should try prioritizing what appeals to voters in those states. Could Talarico do it? I suppose. But I just want to point out, like, he's a Texas state representative, right? There's about 200,000 people who live in his district, which, by the way, overlaps with Austin. Austin, I love the place, but it's not exactly representative of the state. The unofficial slogan, keep Austin weird, right? Now, in a given year, 8 million people will vote in Texas in a midterm election. So if you're within 5% percentage points, you're within 400,000 votes of the leader, right? Like, you just need to win an enormous amount of votes to win in a state like this. So I just think it's the same old pattern continuing, Greg. Help me. I need help.
Yeah, Jim did not add in the sound effects, but they are appropriate. That truck you heard backing up was Jim subconsciously telling Democrats, slow your roll, man. This is not going to happen, and probably in 2026. Well, possible. You never know. But it's unlikely, and it's unlikely, at least for the immediate foreseeable future. I actually knew a guy named James Talarico growing up. His son was a couple years ahead of me in high school. Good family, good soccer coach. Led my brother's soccer team to a really, really good season. This guy seems like a decent guy, but ultimately, for all of the wholesome talk, where does he stand on the issues? Because that's ultimately where the people of Texas are going to land on this particular thing. I hope his faith is genuine. I hope he's a good guy. But ultimately, the people of Texas have a very clear idea of what they want in their statewide elected leaders. And if you're towing most of the Democratic Party line, that's what's going to probably matter most when they head to the ballot box. Well, the Democrats try
Those are deep, ominous rumbles for Texas Democrats, okay? Just be aware of that.
Let's talk.
No, it's not my stomach.
All right, well, let's talk about your skincare. And for guys, you know the drill. Most skincare products aren't made for us. They just aren't, and so they don't work great for us. And the ones that claim to be made for us, they're complicated. They have really weird ingredients, or they just don't deliver results. But all of that's over now that there's Caldera Labs high-performance skincare made just for men, simple, effective, and backed by science.
They can attack the stress lines formed by really bad coverage in Politico or above-ground nuclear testing while you're trying to tape a podcast. We're talking about an award-winning serum with 27 botanicals and powerful antioxidants to protect against daily stressors. The eye serum targets dark circles, puffiness, and tired eyes with peptides and adaptogens. The base layer is a lightweight moisturizer with plant stem cells and snow mushroom for deep hydration and a matte finish. And remember, it's formulated for men, created by expert cosmetic chemists who specialize in men's skincare.
In a consumer study, 100% saw smoother, healthier skin, and more than 90% noticed better hydration and a more youthful look. Skincare doesn't have to be complicated, but it should be good. So upgrade your routine with Caldera Lab and see the difference for yourself. Go to calderalab.com/3ml and use 3ml at checkout for 20% off your first order. All right, as longtime listeners, or at least relatively longtime listeners know, Jim Garrity was in Syria for a number of days earlier this year. I believe that was late February, early March. And of course, it was in the aftermath of the collapse of the Assad regime in late 2024. And at that time, talking to high-ranking figures in the Orthodox Church and others there, I mean, the country was in complete shambles, as Jim described, but there was at least hope that things could start moving in the right direction. Since then, there's been enough sectarian violence, some would call it ethnic cleansing, genocide, whatever you want, I don't know what the numbers need to be, to cast a whole bucket of ice water on that optimistic projection. The head of the Syrian government now is a guy named Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, used to go by Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, used to be ISIS, used to be al-Nusra and all that sort of thing, but says now he's turned over, he's not that anymore, and he wants just Syria to be back and come back and have a peaceful future. But that's not happening because the latest incident here is the Greek Orthodox leadership in Soweto, Syria, issuing an urgent statement saying, "Glory to God in all things. I direct this message to the entire world and call upon them to urgently intervene to stop the terrorist massacres in Syria. I direct this humanitarian plea to those of sound minds who love peace. The ongoing war in Syria, govern it, is a war of annihilation, killing both young and old. Therefore, I raise my voice loudly to the international community and to the United Nations to help us. I hope this cry reaches the whole world." Issued by the Archdiocese of Basra, Haran, Jabal al-Arab, and the Golan Greek Orthodox. And so now for his part, the president of Syria is defending the Sunni militias who have gone down there and killed a bunch of Druze and Christians as well, saying that it's when his security forces were withdrawn that the Druze actually started it. He says the Druze are the instigators here. The Bedouins, as he calls them, or the militias, had no choice but to respond. And now he's calling for everybody to honor the ceasefire. So, Jim, I know there was cautious optimism, but it seems to be eroding pretty fast here.
Yeah, what we're seeing in recent days is a larger scale version of the horrors that engulfed the area around Latakia, which really kind of blew up just a couple of days after I came back in March of this year. Jelani turned al-Shara, for much of his time in power, has been saying all of the right things, saying how he wanted a multi-ethnic, multi-religious Syria to be at peace and prosperous, saying everything you'd wanted to hear. But as you noted, the background heading up HTS, which was basically the Nusra Front. They grew out of ISIS, had a split with ISIS, and then before that he had a stint in Al-Qaeda. So like there's lots of good reason for the U.S. and Western powers to be wary, but because they were saying the right things, and saying the right things and seeing the right things in the first couple of months, both our Western allies and the Trump administration said, okay, we're going to lift sanctions, because the Syrians I spoke to, particularly around Damascus, were just desperate. Said, look, we've had 13 years of a civil war. I can tell you from firsthand that the infrastructure devastation is just across the board. It makes the damage in Ukraine look like an HGTV project. And so, they desperately needed interaction with the rest of the world. They desperately needed to start trade again. They desperately needed stable currency, and they desperately needed to get life to get back to normal. Best case scenario is that al-Shara doesn't control the military anymore. And let's remember that the Syrian military used to be HTS. While I was there was an ardent supporter of the liberation of the Syrian people from the Assad regime who was saying, look, HTS doesn't exist anymore. We're now really a functional military. I think that is very much in doubt in light of recent events. The best case scenario, as I was saying, is that al-Shara doesn't want this to happen, but that he's powerless, which is still not a very good, still not a particularly good, outcome. The worst outcome is that he's either turning a blind eye or he's going through the motions of opposing it without actually genuinely opposing it. You'd like to think that this guy, having been in power for now, let's say 6 months and a little bit of December, would have a clear situation. Like, he's got to understand this will make anybody who was thinking about investing in Syria, anybody who was thinking about lifting sanctions, reestablishing trade relations, Syrian exiles who were thinking of moving back and who had started moving back in certain numbers over the first 6 months of this year, all of this stuff is going to scare them all away, and should be, because this is, straight up terrorism. This is straight up executions and ethnic religious warfare. You'd think everybody in Syria would be sick of it, and these folks who I spoke to out there definitely were very clear of it. But there's a question of, when your military force is a bunch of ragtag militias and all based on this loosely shared religious extremist ideology, they don't transition into a disciplined, organized, we only act on orders from above military force anymore. So I don't know whether al-Shara is turning a blind eye or whether he's, okay with it, or whether he wants it to stop and just doesn't have any power. I would strongly recommend he get together people that he considers to be loyal and send them down there and get them to stop this stuff, because otherwise the world will see him as complicit, and probably a country that's been through the roughest 13-year stretch of any planet on Earth, it's only going to stretch on and continue. And this, what would look like a very promising start to the year could get very dark for the Syrians very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, if the two options are he can't do anything about it or he won't do anything about it, those are not glowing reviews of his ability to deal with this situation. You mentioned the fact that we've dropped the sanctions. So I'm curious as to what you think Trump would need to see to maybe reevaluate that situation, even if that's the right move necessarily. But we've also seen the Israelis intervene here. They just bombed a Sunni militia convoy headed down to that area, and there were strikes not that long before that. So we're definitely seeing some people paying attention here.
Yeah, pretty much the moment the Assad regime fell, the Israelis were like, so, you thought the Iranian air defense was subpar. The Syrian air defense was basically going to be non-existent. What's the saying? Meat's back on the menu, boys. So basically anything in Syria the Israelis had ever wanted to blow up, they now had a free shot to blow up. Anything, everything involving chemical weapons research, the intelligence organizations, everything basically got bombed to smithereens by them. And look, they share a border in the Golan Heights. It's always been tense. The Israelis see the Druze as an ally of sorts in the sense that they are non-Muslim, and there are Druze also living in Israeli territory. And so it's not surprising. And there are some people who argued that Israel was, while it's understandable they'd want to protect their border, it's understandable they'd want to protect their interests and make sure that the new regime would not have anything left lying around from the old regime that could be threatening to the Israelis. There was a general sense that it had been fairly heavy-handed in all this. As for what Trump is going to do about this, Trump said he did this and he had the meeting with al-Shura in large part because of the lobbying by the Saudis and other Middle Eastern Arab countries. I think Trump was very open-minded on this, but I don't think this was a deeply held belief of Donald Trump that he's a deep believer in al-Shura and the future of Syria. When Assad fell, President-elect Trump was like, this is not our fight. We're not getting involved. And I think, having been there, I don't think there was any particular U.S. interest. Although it is worth noting, we do have U.S. forces over there. I think it's down to about, I want to say a couple hundred, maybe 500 or so. Most of them are in the northeastern part of the country, allied with the Kurds. Like when I was, where we were, I didn't see any U.S. forces. But then again, only 500 in the whole country. It's mostly sticking to their bases. You're not going to see too many of them there. So, it's just sad as hell. And we will see if this manages to die down. It did look very grim around Latakia earlier this year, and then things appeared to calm down. I think it calmed down because I wrote a very pessimistic column in the Washington Post. And then immediately after saying, well, that's it. It was a nice run, but things look bad in Syria. Things immediately got better. Maybe I need to get working on another one of those columns, Greg, and that will make them calm down. As soon as I predict doom, things get better.
Yeah, I think there's clear direct evidence that had the impact that you desired there. Yeah, I would agree that I don't necessarily think there needs to be U.S. direct involvement there at all. But the fact that this is spiraling out of control again, it kind of brings back the old Dennis Green line of they are who we thought they were. And they're running out of time to prove us wrong on that, I think. All right. Well, when you see headlines like this, and man, if you saw any of the videos over the weekend, thankfully X did a pretty good job of hiding those off the feed page. But there were people certainly describing what those videos were looking like of the slaughter down there. And man, it was very, very gruesome. And so when you deal with news like this, sometimes it's hard to process that. And this is an ad by BetterHelp. And whether it's, what you're seeing in the news, dealing with family stuff or the workplace, maybe it's time to talk to somebody about that. Because workplace stress, for example, is now one of the top causes of declining mental health, with 61% of the global workforce experiencing higher than normal levels of stress. But we can't stop working. You can turn off the news, but it doesn't mean this stuff's still not going to be happening. You take vacations and all sorts of other things. But the bottom line is when it starts to get too much, talk to somebody about it, and BetterHelp's there to talk.
There are a lot of good reasons you might need therapy, and high on my list is how Politico covers Texas Democrats. With more than 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people all around the world. And it works with an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5. And that's not just based on a handful of reviews. That's based on more than 1.7 million client reviews. And it's convenient. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time.
As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. 3 Martini Lunch listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/3ml. That's betterhelp.com/3ml. All right, Jim, on to the crazy, and it's a follow-up from our crazy on Friday when we were, actually a good martini on Friday, where we were talking about, while we don't want to see 200 people lose their jobs, the end of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert will not be a great loss for humanity. It basically turned it from a successful comedy show with, from the legacy of David Letterman into one that was just completely focused on attacking Trump or sucking up to the Democrats as he brought them on regularly as guests and so forth. But the lefties are not only upset that he's gone, they're convinced there's a massive conspiracy going on as a result of this, and that Trump is getting in position to impose a censorship regime. Over on MSNBC, here's former NPR CEO Vivian Schiller, who's not only upset about Stephen Colbert, but she's also upset that Congress just defunded NPR and PBS.
Yeah, well, look, this has not been a great week for free speech and speaking truth to power, without a doubt. Look, the circumstantial evidence, and that's all we have, is as follows. CBS has said that they are canceling Stephen Colbert after next season for financial reasons. At the same time, we also know, as you said in the intro, that it is the #1 show in its time slot. And we also know that the new parent company for CBS, or they hope to be the new parent company, has spent money on other things. So it's very curious. And we have to also make note that Stephen Colbert is unafraid to, again, speak truth to power.
What truth to power did he speak during 2021 to 2025?
Notice she's not willing to. He speaks truth to power, not funny to the audience. He always has his priorities straight there. Yeah. Also, what does she run again?
She used to run NPR.
NPR. And how important were profits to NPR?
Not enough, but she's not the only one who's taking crazy pills. Here's Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, no stranger to whack job ideas about what's really happening behind the scenes. Here's the beginning of his statement that he put out on X about what's really happening here.
So I want to tell you why the cancellation of Stephen Colbert's show matters so much. We are on the precipice of entering a censorship state in which Donald Trump is using the powers of the federal government in order to erase criticism from the airwaves. What's happening at CBS right now is bone-chilling.
Bone-chilling, Jim. I love that. Going back to Vivian Schiller for a second, she's like, he was #1 in his time slot. Yeah, everybody stinks, though, in that time slot, and they're losing $40 million a year.
Gutfeld gets like 1 million more viewers a night. Yes. So she's wrong on that. I know. Look, I know she's not used to being in competition with others in her field because she ran NPR, right? So you've got the government giving you money, so you don't have to worry about supply and demand and who's listening and things like that. And I realize audience size doesn't matter if you've been running NPR either, But like Chris Murphy is contending that this is about taking critics of Trump off the air. Greg, can you think of anywhere else you could find criticism of Trump? Anywhere on the airwaves?
Every other late night show except Gutfeld?
Right? Yeah, So, look, there was a huge hullabaloo about this. And I actually wrote over the weekend, there was so much. It's like, look, you can basically choose which world you want to live in through your perceptions. If you want to believe that there's this shadowy conspiracy, right? Or that, Trump threatens CBS and that there's these spineless corporate executives who are terrified and they want their merger with Sundance. And they're like, we have no choice. Don't you understand? We have to take Colbert up the air. He's speaking truth to power. If that's a very dramatic world. It's got heroes, it's got villains, it's got, this very good, easy to follow moral narrative. Okay, fine. But to be in that world, to live mentally in that world, you have to ignore the fact that it was losing $40 million a year. And what's more is that over a 6-year span, ad revenue had cut in half or close to cut in half. Those are really bad. If your ad revenue goes down for 1 year, maybe it's a recession, maybe new competition. There's 1 year blip. Okay, that can happen. When it continues over a 6-year span, there's really not any sign that that's probably not just even a matter of the host. Oh, by the way, over the weekend, Wall Street Journal and other places reported Stephen Colbert was making $20 million a year. So on the one hand, if Stephen Colbert said, you know what, to save the show, I'm willing to work for nothing, it would then be losing $20 million a year instead of losing $40 million. It had big structural problems. Now, my former colleague Kyle Smith, who now writes for the Wall Street Journal doing film reviews, he basically said, Colbert 3 years ago, when the losses weren't quite so bad, could have said, wow, our ratings are down, our ad revenue is down, I can see what's coming. I'm going to take $8 million a year instead of 12, whatever, some smaller amount, right? And he says, and I'm going to need everybody else on the show to take a pay cut too. I'm trying to lead by example here. We're probably going to have to let some people go. We're probably going to have to, make a whole bunch of changes so that the show is less expensive. But in the end, I'm not worth $20 million a year, and the show's going to get canceled if we, He's Stephen Colbert. He's the host of the show. His name is on the show. There's no way he doesn't know what the ratings are. There's no way he doesn't know what the ad revenue is, and there's no way that the Garden Network's going to hide that from him, right? So he could have recognized the problem and acted on it. And he chose not to. And I think his attitude was, well, look, no, this is the Late Show. It was founded by Letterman back in 1993. It's an institution. Even if we're losing $40 million a year, they're just going to keep this thing going because it's that important to the network. And it wasn't. And that's all. So, also let's point out, Colbert did rip into network executives for settling the lawsuit with Trump and paying $16 million. And so somebody's like, well, Jim, don't you think that was a factor? It could be a factor. I'm sure it made it easier for them to pull the trigger. If you bite the hand that feeds you, you should not be surprised when you don't get fed anymore, right? On this podcast, I've talked about, I don't talk about the Washington Post, even if there are people who I really want to. Even if, and once Jen Rubin leaves and once Taylor Lorenz leaves, then I feel comfortable talking about them, right? I think it's entirely reasonable for your employer to say, please do not mock us publicly while we are collecting paychecks from us. I think it's an entirely reasonable, request for them to make. Stephen Colbert felt completely comfortable making fun of CBS network executives on the air. Now, did that cause the cancellation of the show? No. If that show was making money, they'd keep it on the air. But I think it probably made it a little bit easier. But let's assume Stephen Colbert never did any of this. Let's assume Stephen Colbert never told a joke about Trump and he never, okay, fine. Let's say there's no merger with Sundance. If the show was still losing $40 million a year, does CBS keep it on? Very hard to see that.
Yeah, why would you?
Very hard. You can't hand wave away $40 million loss a year, and particularly when it's year after year after year, and no sign that the slide in advertising revenue is going to turn around.
Yeah, I mean, you only waste $40 million on washed-up free agents if you're the Chicago Bears, generally.
Okay. Are you ready for this? Because I looked it up, Greg. Stephen Colbert makes more money per year than any center in the NFL. Highest paid one makes $19 million. I think it's the guy for the Dolphins.
I mean, I don't watch CBS unless we're talking about sports. At this time of year, it's usually golf and things like that. And you see ads for the Late Show, and it's like, on Tuesday, it's Elizabeth Warren. And you're going to get like a couple million people. Who wants to fall asleep after listening to that for 20 minutes? I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so when you watch this, lack of economic sense or just knee-jerk conspiracy theory happening here, it's just wild that they would leap to this conclusion. But, they always pick the least sympathetic martyrs or pretend martyrs. They always find these people that have got like massive rap sheets who are illegal immigrants. And now it's Stephen Colbert, who's made well over $100 million probably since he took over for Letterman.
Oh, way more than that.
Yeah,
way
exactly.
More than that.
So,
but let's listen, Greg, let's take a moment of silence to pause to remember the real victims of the Trump era. Stephen Colbert. Exactly. And Rosie O'Donnell, we can't move back to the United States. That's, so.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking seriously of a moment of silence, when it comes to the conservative movement, there have been huge figures over the years. Your old boss, William F. Buckley Jr., obviously perhaps the most famous and most profound leader of the conservative movement, but there certainly have been many others over the past, 60, 70 years. And one of those was clearly Ed Feulner. He was a mover and shaker up on Capitol Hill in a variety of roles, but he's best known for being the founder and for decades the president of the Heritage Foundation, which was just a great ideas factory for the right on so many different issues for decade after decade after decade. And so a guy who was faithful to the movement, a guy who, while I didn't know, was well regarded personally and professionally in the conservative circles and was known as a devout family man, definitely leaves a great legacy, and our condolences to our friends at Heritage, but his impact will not be forgotten soon.
Greg, I was thinking about the other day, someone brought up Rush Limbaugh and the degree to which, as powerful as conservative talk radio was, it certainly has lost something since we lost Rush, and the degree to which, I don't want to take away anything from anybody else who's in conservative talk radio, but Rush set the standard, and everybody else was kind of following him and trying to do what he was doing. I think Ed Feulner, the Heritage Foundation is what you want a think tank to be. in terms of its influence, in terms of its intellectual candle power, going back through all of its history, the degree to which it would shape federal policy, the way it would basically be the playbook for an incoming Republican administration. The way it very often was where a Republican administration would hang out when Democrats were in the White House. Like this was, this was the summer home of the of Republican administrations of sorts. So and look, again, there are other great think tanks out there, but I think again, Heritage Foundation set the standard and kind of set the playbook of what you want a think tank to be, and an enormous part that is an enormous reflection of Ed Fulmer and the way he worked, the way he prioritized, and the way he the vision that he had and that he managed to turn into reality.
Yeah, well said. Well said. What a legacy he leaves after 50 plus years of prominent leadership here in Washington. So, Jim, on that somber note, we will call it for today, but we'll be back again tomorrow. We'll see what we've got to chew on then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already. And tell your friends about it as well. We'd love to have them listening. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow both of us on X. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Monday and join us again Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.